The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to an episode of Planted. I'm Sara Pine, your host, and today we have the director of Ladybuds, CJ Russo, in the house today. She is an award-winning short film director that has had films screened all over the world, including the Sundance Film Festival, and has been broadcasted on Showtime, PBS, IFC, Logo, and Netflix. She is a 2018 fellow of the Sundance Institute Women in Film Financing Initiative with Ladybuds, and is also a fellow of the Film Independence Director and Screenwriters Labs with her project directed by Dorothy Arzner. Notable film credits include A Woman Reported, about the moments before a hate crime occurs, Size 'Em Up, a coming-of-age story, Straight Down the Aisle, Confessions of Lesbian Bridesmaids. She's the winner of the Outfest Best Short Documentary Award for its poignant view on marriage, non-equality, pre-Prop 8, which was a weird time, and numerous music videos. After receiving 2 art degrees in photography, a BFA from the University of Buffalo, and MFA from the Visual Studies Workshop in Rochester, New York, so you also know what a hard winter is. CJ moved to Hollywood and worked for Kodak for 15 years as a post-production supervisor on over 15 feature films. Russo is an exhibited fine art photographer with recent group shows in Los Angeles, West Hollywood, and Beverly Hills. She has dedicated the last 4 years to producing and directing Ladybuds, her first feature film, which had its world premiere at Hot Docs 2021. Welcome, CJ. I am so glad to have you here.
Sara, thank you so much for inviting me to talk with you today. I'm honored to be on the show.
I am just so excited that we got here because, like, when we were talking earlier, the last time we spoke, you were in the thick of it.
I was. That was a few years ago. I was producing a couple of different cannabis videos for different companies while I was making the film, and I think that's when we met. And, man, it's been a long journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. Yeah, you spent a day with me talking about CBD.
That's right. And I love CBD. It was so cool to learn about those products and to do that shoot. But, yeah, it was great to meet you. That was in Los Angeles a few years ago.
Yeah. Oh, that was so much fun. That was a good time. Let's back it up even more. So, question I always ask my guests, what was your first experience with cannabis?
Wow. Man, I've had a relationship with cannabis for a very long time. When I was 14 was when I first tried cannabis. I was in high school. And it's so interesting to reflect on this. I had gone to Catholic school for 9 years. And you can imagine, the culture of being in Catholic school. So when I went to high school, it was a public school, and, kind of like a whole new world opened up to me. And I just kind of gravitated to a group of people that were very creative and sort of felt, like a little bit like outliers. And I was just really excited to smoke weed and try it, So I remember I was at high school. I went to Blindbrook High School in Rybrook, New York. And I just hooked up with a bunch of kids that we went out the back of the school, down a path, and lit up a joint. And it was my first time. And, I don't exactly remember how I felt, but I was excited to try it. It was, I think, it was relaxing. I always kind of felt like a little bit like a fish out of water at school. I've always kind of felt like one of the outsiders myself. So I think I gravitated to a community of kids that were exploring drugs and were really into music. And, I was into the Grateful Dead. And so trying cannabis, in high school really opened a world of, a new world of music appreciation, of creativity, and of community, finding community in a group of kids that were like outcasts and just finding ways to have fun in the suburbs, right? Back in the day, right? So, we would just sit around and listen to music. At the time, it was like Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, and classic rock, But yeah, no, I was really excited to try cannabis, and I think for me, it really helped me feel kind of accepted. It gave me a body experience that made me relax and just kind of like opened the doorways to new creativity as well. I was in a band in high school, and it was a lot of fun back then. I use it differently now, but back then it was very much recreational and like kind of to escape a little bit. So yeah, it's interesting to think back on those early days for sure.
Oh, it's an interesting thing to think about, like how differently we used it back then. Because I know, like for me, being I'm going to totally date myself, but being a teenager in the 80s, it's like,
oh, I'm with you on that.
You know,
yeah.
It's like it just really. I just remember like at the time just finding that there was this thing of acceptance and finding my group and listening to music and trying it. And I always looked at it as recreational, but I think like, I don't know, the teenage years, like I have a niece that's just starting to go through them right now, and I would just look at her and I'm like, honey, yeah, I don't want to be you. It's going to be a hard time. Hormones are a very powerful thing, and you're going to have some angsty moments. So it's like, even though it was recreational, I think in some ways for me it was like creating the balance, because I didn't realize until I tried it then. And for you listeners out there, I'm not condoning youth use of cannabis. It's just we do what we do at a certain age. But it helped me understand that I actually had anxiety. I didn't realize it then. And, now it's like, it's interesting because it's like, I still like to get high, but I use it for so many other things just to create balance. And I wish we would have been able to have more conversations about that back then. Although I don't know if Teen Sara would have listened to that. I think I just wanted to listen to Minor Threat.
Exactly. Yeah, we didn't want to listen to anybody when we were 14, 15, 16, right? We were just on our own journey of discovery. And, I had a tough family life at the time as well. And when I say I use it to escape, that's true as well. And I definitely use it differently now. But it also, it enhanced so much for me. And it really was fun to be, following the Grateful Dead up and down the East Coast and being a part of that community where cannabis is very central to bringing people together around music and, I don't know, camaraderie in a way.
Yeah, it sure is. It sure is. It's been really, well, as you know, my husband was a member of Further, and like working in cannabis and having the support of that amazing community has been really, really lovely, because it's a really wonderful group of people who love music, and a lot of them really love cannabis, and just, kind creative folks. It's a great group to be with, I guess I would say.
Yeah, and I think that safe about it once you find your community, and that's a part of it as well. Because I think cannabis really brings out, for me, it honestly brings out my true self in a way. I've been realizing that lately. I'm so much more who I am when I'm on cannabis. I don't know if it's an inner child thing or if it's just my true authentic self, but there's something beautiful about cannabis and really just bringing out, the truth of who a person is. Obviously depends on the cannabis and the dosage amount and all that stuff, but I find that for me, I'm a microdoser, and you have to find the right flower, the right product, but I really am starting to realize that I'm kind of more myself when I'm a little high.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, especially if I don't know if you deal with this, but I know that for myself, I deal with anxiety, and in the past, from like 20s to 30s, I was an occasional cannabis user, but I would use it, after work, after hours, more like for stress management and just to chill out. But now that, I started using it regularly when I was going through cancer, and then starting to work in cannabis, using things daily, it helped my communication, because I realized how much I was hindered by a lot of my anxiety and kind of seeing like certain behaviors that weren't like authentic to my true self, that were out of the way when you have the right combinations, like I've been really digging on a CBD CBG combo, because it helps me with my ADD.
Okay.
It's been some good
it's
stuff.
great to land on what works for you. Like there's so many different products out there right now that, one of the benefits of legalization is that you can find consistency within a product usually, that I think it is really helpful for wellness applications.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I want to make sure, and this is something that, your documentary also talks about, is like that some of the smaller, more craft businesses are able to survive because they have some of the most creative, beautiful products that are really effective for people.
Yeah, and what I learned, in making the documentary is the heart and soul of the people that are really passionate about the plant and what they're doing with it is really beautiful, right? So I've always wanted to support, small businesses, small farmers, organic food. I feel like where you spend your money is a political act, and I definitely like to keep it local and support, women entrepreneurs and just, smaller sort of businesses. And, it's those types of people that are really making special products. They really are putting a lot of love and care and pride into their gardens, into their formulations, whatever it is, if it's salve or if it's flour or if it's, something else. I like to support that. You can really sense that there's a lot of care being put into that. And then I hope that people really do look at the cannabis they're buying, the products they're buying, and think about where it comes from. I think we're at this moment with legalization where people are needing to be educated about who's making them, where it's coming from, where's the money going, et cetera, which is a part of the reason why I was inspired to make the film, because, these big businesses that are coming into the space are just creating, these products that are, assembly lines sometimes, and, not really helping our local communities or the economy where we are. So my hope is that the film gets people to think about that and also see, as you can see in the film, that women are the backbone of this industry, and I wanted to honor the people that really laid the groundwork for what we have, for the legal industry we have today. So
going into the documentary, so you talked about part of your inspiration. What really got you to say, let's do this? And how did you? And you have a great group of people that you've interviewed. How did you identify who you wanted to work with on this?
Well, it was a little bit of a process. As a filmmaker and as an artist, I'm usually led by my curiosity and to learn and to know more. And back in 2016, when Prop 64 was on the ballot in California, I'm in Los Angeles, I was like, wow, this is really going to change things in California. This is going to change the way people think about cannabis. This is going to change the economy. It was exciting, right? I didn't know. I read the proposition, and I read all the propositions, but I didn't really know, what was going to happen. But I could, everybody was excited. Oh, cannabis is going legal. This is a good thing, right? So I started to dig into the media around it, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see so many women entrepreneurs stepping up and being vocal and talking about cannabis. And I was really impressed. I was like, wow, I had always thought this was, an industry dominated by men. Honestly, every other industry, but this industry itself is very bro-centric. And, And to see these women stepping up and coming out of the shadows to tell their stories, just at, different women in cannabis networking events that I started to go to, I was just really drawn in to who these women were and their stories. So I started interviewing women. I was at a crossroads of what I was going to do next as a filmmaker. I was actually potentially going to be going on to produce and direct a scripted feature film, but as a documentary, you need to raise money for any kind of film you're going to make. But with a documentary, you can kind of just start shooting, So I just started to interview women in the space, and I interviewed so many women, so many amazing women at cannabis farmers markets and at these networking events. And I was just like, wow, there's something really interesting here. This field is really dominated by women, and it's really cool. I want to dig in more. So I started to get invited to their cannabis farms up north in Mendocino and Humboldt. And, like I said earlier, I've been smoking weed my entire life. When you get invited to a cannabis farm, you have to say yes.
Yeah.
And so I packed up the car with camping gear and camera gear and went up north for a couple of weeks and just interviewed a lot of women in the space. And ultimately, over 100 people I've interviewed for this film. And then, I had to really think about what I was doing, because it couldn't just be, a feature film just with interviews. Storytelling, you need an arc, you need, drama, you need conflict. What was this going to be about? So for me, it's really important to highlight diverse voices. As a queer filmmaker, I think it's really important to give people voice that don't usually get it, people on the margins, people of color, queer people, women, so I wanted it to be, have a diverse range of voices. So that's how I kind of chose, the specific women. And I also wanted women to be represented like in the farming, area of cannabis, in the entrepreneurship, in the activists, because as you know, cannabis touches so many different people, cultures, issues. And so it's such a big topic, and I needed to kind of hone it in a little bit. But yeah, I was just so inspired by telling some of these women's stories. And then, with one of my producers, Christian Bruno and Michael Katz, we talked about how to frame the film, and we decided to film 1 year leading up to legalization in California, and then the 1 year following in the lives of these women, to see how they would fare against, all of these big businesses coming in. And everybody was so optimistic at the beginning and excited, and we had no idea what was going to be around the corner. But the camera was rolling the whole time. So it just turned into the story of legalization in California through the lens of these women. And it's kind of a story that not a lot of people are telling, because it's the real story of, the operators that have been in the space for a long time. So that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's kind of the inspiration and how the film kind of got off and got started into production.
And for not planning it, you sure had a hell of an arc in that documentary.
Once I was like in it, right. Once I was in it, I'm the kind of person that I finish what I start. A lot of people just keep filming and they don't really finish, right? So, but I'm just like, okay, I'm not going to be filming for hours and traveling up and down the state and not kind of complete this film. So, we just found ways to keep going. We applied for grants. We had crowdsourcing campaigns, and I had a great team with me, a great, very small team of people that were so dedicated to working on the project. And we just kept going. And then, eventually, I had 4 different editors on this film, and each one chipped away at the story. We had, at the end of the day, we had 500 hours of footage.
Wow.
So this story could have gone so many different ways, but I just wanted to sort of represent the voices of these strong, courageous women to tell their stories and show the side of legalization that is actually the reality of what's going on in California. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, for people who are in states where they're starting to put together policy or they've just started their programs, California is a really good example of there are some things that we did right that I feel like are kind of more in the 215 phase of our,
Right.
of our cycle. And then you see all the things that we messed up on. We have a lot of work to do, and that was one of the things that, because I was one of the co-chairs of the San Francisco Legalization Task Force when 64 was on the ballot. Yeah, and we were, talking about the fact of we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We should be looking at what other states did and how they succeeded and how they failed. But like
Right.
we don't learn from our mistakes, and I feel like policy by and large, even when we look at throughout the nation, because all these states in themselves have their own very individualized cultures, which I think a lot of people, it's like when you think about it, when you go to visit you get it, but you don't really think about it when you think about us as a cohesive country. It's like these policies are based a lot on state culture, which is really strong, and stigma. And
Hmm.
so now we're seeing, people who were able to survive for, decades on their work in cannabis, not having businesses, and just all the craziness that's happening. And the fact that a lot of people were driven back to the traditional market, which is what we were trying to, we were trying to
Right.
make it so people wouldn't get incarcerated anymore.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, the film is a little bit of a cautionary tale and can, inspire conversations, hopefully, across the country and other states with policymakers to see, exactly what did work in California, what didn't work. It could have been done a different way. You and I know that.
Yeah.
We had a working model in place with the medical cannabis business model that was just prior to 64, and it would have been nice to have carried that over a little bit, and there's a lot deep in policy. I'm not a policy expert, but I do know, just seeing the repercussions and what's happening, that it could have been structured quite differently with the taxes and with the regulations, and letting the 1 acre cap, leaving the 1 acre cap in the proposition, so
Yeah. I mean, I think in so many ways, like, people will talk about, we never should have passed it, but, and this is just my opinion, I feel like the longer we waited, the more greedy fingers would have already been in the pie creating policy, and we were going to have to fix it no matter what we did. But the thing that makes me
yeah.
really sad about it is, and I guess I can also say that in some ways it's like I have the privilege of living in my lovely Bay Area bubble, where,
Right.
I started working in cannabis in the Castro, where we just would joke that we were a bunch of nerdy queerdos selling cannabis and educating people, but I always, especially with the way, medicinal cannabis came about, I've always looked at cannabis as more focused, the roots of it focused in queer culture and female culture, and especially because you got to do a documentary at a time where we were at a really pivotal point in the movement, in the industry, where it was dominated by women, and it was very rare. And there were just such, like, working with, the women in their companies and their products, and just like how soulful and healing and wonderful everything was, and how radically it's changing, where we're seeing female focused companies really struggling to make ends meet, and we're seeing the patterns of our patriarchal society being like, okay, we're going to turn this back into a bro fest, and what can we do to change that? I mean, there's what you said, which is really important: voting with your wallet, purchasing, from companies that you believe in. But I'm also wondering what else we can do to help uplift women in the industry and continue the female focus so that we can have some really, not to say that men can't be thoughtful and soulful and healers in themselves, because we all know wonderful men who are, but this was a really interesting, it was a change in the way we could do business and look at business and be compassionate and give to the community without, while still being sustainable as companies, and just having a very community-oriented, soulful experience. And I know I just ran on. But what are your thoughts, CJ?
I agree with you. I agree with the sentiment completely, but I feel like education is key, and storytelling, which is where, I come in to, create this film that, what I'm finding when I'm sitting in the theater with audiences is really resonating. And so I think it's super important to have us document, the history of the pioneers in the space, in any industry, and to honor them. Ladybugs shines the light on, the queer cannabis history that happened with Dennis Perone and Scott Imler and Brownie Mary and all the folks, in the Castro that really pushed medical marijuana legalization to the forefront. And I think that, to my surprise, I didn't even know about that history. So I was thrilled to learn it, but I was also like, oh my God, how could I not know this? So I felt a responsibility to include it in the film. And I think that, the more people, learn about the history and are educated about, who are, the people in the space that, they want to support. And through the art of storytelling, you can change hearts and minds. I feel like I have been dedicated to telling stories that are, not so mainstream, but in a way that, can reach a broad audience and have the mainstream think about these things a little bit differently. So I think that, artists and storytellers and, really have the ability to reach people. And for me, creating this film, Ladybugs, I wanted to have universal themes that people could relate to. So, to draw them into the story, themes about family, themes about elders, themes about business that, just about anybody can relate to. And I think that is important, to be able to tell these stories and capture and document the history so that future generations and our kids and, whomever comes after us, will know about the history and will be educated. And I think that's ultimately the way people will change their way of looking at things. And hopefully, my hope is that they will pivot and support the small farmers, the smaller businesses, the women entrepreneurs. I mean, we have to fight for our place at the table every day, as a business person, so I think the more we can educate and support, the more people will hopefully think about it, and then they will support.
Yeah, watching
it's a battle.
Yeah, that's it. It certainly is. It's like anytime I get on the phone with somebody who's working in cannabis, you hear it in their voices, and it's like, "How you doing?
Yeah.
Is it Dark Night of the Soul week? Yep. Let's sit and talk about it."
I know, it's sad. It's sad. I've witnessed so many, people that have now become good friends in the cannabis industry that are struggling. It is. It's a difficult moment right now for a lot of businesses.
It is, and it's watching the documentary this past weekend. I was really, I've heard a lot of stories as well, but like for people who don't understand what people are going through, and every time somebody asks me, they're like, I think I want to get into cannabis, can you give me some advice? And I always just kind of want to chuckle and be like, bless your heart. You gotta love it. You gotta love it. But it was really something to see, the struggles that everybody went through, but also their perseverance and their love of what they do. And especially like with the Bud sisters, and just in the beginning, like just how excited they were about what they were doing and all their plans. And it made me just so incredibly sad when they, they had to drop their license and they were, in that greenhouse talking about how they just have a few plants and then, having to, after running your business for so many years, having to go, work for somebody else, which isn't a bad thing, but it's a hard thing when you're a person of a certain mindset and drive, to make that shift.
Yeah, of course. They definitely, for me, represented the OGs that have been, passionately cultivating cannabis off the grid in the hills, and making medicine for people who needed it. I mean, their hearts are so big, the Butt Sisters, and they are a generation, that have been cultivating for decades. That, they just with this new regulation, with the new legalization regulations, just couldn't really afford to, make their farm compliant, off in the middle of nowhere. So
yeah.
So it is sad. But I do hope that the film is also inspiring in a way, because these women are really passionately fighting to make their dreams come true. I mean, they've been in the industry for decades. They deserve a piece of the American dream that everybody wants, the myth of the American dream.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's their industry. So, people like Sue Taylor and Chia Rodriguez and Karen Wagner, they fought to succeed. And I hope that, the film does resonate to women, young women, all kinds of people, that, if you are passionate about something, to not give up. And if you believe in it, keep working at your dreams, keep trying to make them come true.
Yeah. Well, you see that. You see the drive, you see the passion. It's like, there were times where I really felt for them and felt very sad when things didn't go, but you could also see the fact that these are very smart, driven women with big hearts, and they're really working to make things happen. So I do of course, I'm just speaking from my perspective, but I really did see that message of hope that you were putting out there. But I also just saw a lot of we have a lot to work on. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't understand, and gosh, I know I'm going to sound like a Debbie Downer saying this, but is just the sheer amount of suicides of farmers because of not being able to run businesses that they've run for decades.
Yeah, I just started to hear about that, and that is really horrific to be hearing about. I just think that when you try so hard and you believe so hard, and it's just the system is set up against you, and it's just really, it's a tough road.
It is.
It really is.
And I think the important thing is having documentarians like you who are highlighting, what's going on, the joy of the work, what people are having to go through that no other business has to. I mean, running a business and being an entrepreneur outside of cannabis is a challenge in itself, but it takes a very special, passionate person to be able to do it on a small to mid scale, quite honestly, because when we get into the bigger stuff, that's bigger money and it's a whole different ballpark. But, I just remember even when we were looking at the Berkeley permits and everything, and just watching Sue go in front of, the commission and just being like, you gotta, they have to give it to you.
Yeah.
They have to. And there's, even when you have that permit, all the things that you have to go through to actually open your doors. And it was just to see her persevere and get it done. And even after, when the businesses were starting to get hit after all the stuff that was going on the other summer, which was unfortunate. And it was wow, then a Black-owned business gets hit, but she still persevered and she got through it. And she's just such to meet her, she's just such a lovely, magical person, and you just want her to just kick ass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just started to hear about that, and that is really horrific to be hearing about. I just think that when you try so hard and you believe so hard, and it's just the system is set up against you, and it's just really, it's a tough road. And she did, and she will always rise from the ashes.
She will.
I spent a lot of years getting to know Sue and her family and what they went through, and they just never stopped pressing ahead. There was challenge after challenge after challenge, and Sue was such a bright light in my life. She's so inspiring. She is the definition of resilience and courage, and just, a true light. And
classy as hell to boot.
Yeah, speaks truth. As a person of color, it's very difficult to be navigating the cannabis industry as a business owner, and that needs to be reminded to people that it's not the same, for white male or women business owners compared to people of color. It's definitely trickier to navigate, and there's just so much challenges that they have. So she is just a hero to me that her and her family have succeeded.
Yeah.
Not so much away in the film, but I was so thrilled to have the Taylors have their cannabis dispensary open at the end, and in a way, be a happy ending to a very difficult story. And despite the looting and the destruction that happened during the justified George Floyd protests, not from the protests, but from the organizations that targeted dispensaries that took advantage of the protests, she has risen up, and she has the community rallied together. They really rallied around the pharmacy in that neighborhood, and she told me they even sent in their stimulus checks because they had been watching this family try to open their dispensary for so long, and there's a lot of support. I'm really happy to say that Sue's doing really well, and the dispensary is doing really well, and people should continue to support their business because their heart and soul is really in it.
Yeah, that's it. And you're right. It's the sad thing with that summer with there were so many Black-owned businesses that got hit, and people don't understand that, the protests were absolutely essential, and what was happening with these businesses had nothing to do with those protests. Those were people taking advantage of a situation. Correct. And she's just such an inspiration. Her whole family, just everything that they did. I remember, back in the day, one of the first Supernova women gatherings, and they were there, and getting to hear them talk about what their visions were, and just they made it happen. And that's she should do a master class on cannabis business and cannabis perseverance. It's just I know so many people would sit at her feet and just listen to what she had to go through, and just seeing her have to deal with the city and the permit stuff. I mean, it's unbelievable what people have to go through.
Yeah, and she persevered. And, even more interesting about Sue Taylor is that she, came from being a Catholic school principal.
Yeah.
And came from being informed by, religious doctrines and, people that thought, cannabis and homosexuality as well, which is wrong, So, it's really interesting how she talks about that in the film, and how she came to overcome the stigma around cannabis and saw the healing and turning that understanding of cannabis and acceptance of cannabis into being an advocate for senior citizens, and just for me, she's a visionary.
Yeah.
And she's the voice of medical cannabis for elders, and she's doing so many people a service by educating and showing that, trying to break the stigma of cannabis. And just that alone, she deserves the spotlight too, because as you and I know, cannabis is a wellness product and be really healing for elders, for seniors, for anybody. And as an elder herself, she's able to speak from the heart, and people trust her. So I think she's doing a world of good for the elder population in having them look at cannabis a little bit differently.
Yeah,
So.
I think it's really important for there to be peer education, because it is more relatable. It's a whole different thing to have somebody like, 20, 30 years younger talking to you about it that you don't know. It can be okay, but to have somebody who's, an educator, who's, in your peer group, who's able to break it down for you and normalize it. I always say conversation is normalization. And to have her be able to do that, and she's just so well equipped to have those conversations, being an educator is just, it's so impactful. It's like they're not just a business, they're a community service.
Yeah, no, I think the word you said, impactful, is very accurate, because she's often talked to me about, when an elder goes into a dispensary or talks to a younger person about cannabis, it's hard for them to relate. They really want to trust somebody in their generation that has, maybe come from a place of judgment around cannabis for years, mm-hmm. and now is having a more of an open mind about it. So yeah, there was definitely a cannabis hero in my eyes.
Yeah,
heroine.
And let's talk about Karen, because she's first of all, I love Karen. And I just, watching, I think it was really wonderful. I felt for her, and it was wonderful how you were able to show what you have to go through. Like, you can have a space, you can have everything in order, and just, how your entire business and livelihood hangs on the line, especially like for like all these weird little things that city ordinances have, and they're even more stringent about it around cannabis, even where she was.
Mm-hmm. Well, if there was one person in the film I thought was going to come out shining, I thought it was going to be Karen. And Karen, and again, not to give too much away about the film, Karen is another cannabis hero. She's resilient. She's courageous. She was so optimistic. She's an impeccable business person, coming from being a restaurateur in New York City. I mean, which is probably one of the hardest things to do. Right. And then being transplanted into Humboldt, following her high school sweetheart to Humboldt, and being in the cannabis world. So, Karen went for all of the permits and all of the licenses. She was a businesswoman that was smart, and she applied for everything, trying to figure out, like rolling the dice, what was going to stick, like what could she really succeed in. And, I don't want to give away too much, but, the film just really shows the twists and turns and the difficulties that she was up against, not only from deep-pocketed, companies that, could have a burn rate that could outlast, a small business like Karen. But also, I think there was, it's a succeeding in a culture, be it Humboldt or Mendocino. There's a little bit of a holdover of a prohibitionist mentality. And I think that, people who are trying to make it as cultivators in those regions are having a difficult time. And, who knows? I just think there was a lot of things that she was up against that were very difficult. But she kept going. She persisted. She's still out there persisting, and it was really great to be able to tell her story. She's very generous in inviting me into her home and her life in Humboldt, and looks like someone that was just picked out of Madison Avenue, right? Like, and now she's in Humboldt. Kind of like a fish out of water. And for me as a storyteller, I was like, this is very interesting to me.
Yeah.
So, I thought it would be a really interesting. I tried to pick women in the film that really were very interesting and you could relate to in some way,
Yeah. Well, and I think you did really well with covering a broad spectrum of women. And it is hard because it's like, I want to talk so much more about documentary, but I don't want to give too much away so that, because everybody, you should actually watch it. it's really something. There are much more subtleties than we're bringing up because there's, we don't want to give you the cliff notes on it. We want you to watch it. It's really something to check out. Just talking about it doesn't even give you the full picture of what watching the movie will, for just everything that people go through, where they're coming from, where they're going, and just really like giving you an idea of what we need to do to change the way we're doing business, not only in California with cannabis, but nationally, because we're not only in the future, we're not only going to be having to deal with a lot of the complications of state policy, but once we start throwing federal policy in that too, we do run a really large risk of just basically having people go back into the traditional market, which is what we're trying not to do. And it's interesting because it's like back in the task force days, we always had people from the industry, the movement, and then also people from the public and the city family that are sitting on the task force because it's a community effort. And one of the things that the SFPD seat had mentioned was, our job is to uphold the laws, make better laws for us to uphold. Well, we're gonna have we're gonna have to push to have better laws for them to uphold, because with the complications that the federal government will be throwing in, we'll be seeing a lot more people getting in trouble instead of being free to do business.
Well, it's really interesting because, I've been just reading the headlines lately about how, the law enforcement agencies are just watching, these dispensaries get looted. And,
yeah,
and I think that, again, legalization sweeping the country, we're at a point where we should be deschedulizing cannabis at the federal level. We're going to see this happen. And if California is a snapshot of what could happen, there needs to be a change in the way law enforcement interacts with the cannabis industry. Like I alluded to earlier, there's this prohibitionist mentality that the people that operated in the space before were, looked at as criminals, and now they're going to protect them. So it's like we really need to educate and have conversations that bridge the gap between people in this amazing industry and the law enforcement organizations that need to protect this business that is funneling millions of dollars, if not billions of tax dollars, back into the economy, and they need to be protected. So it continues to fascinate me, how this is unfolding. And it's just a little bit in my film where we saw that discrimination moment against the cannabis farmers, that's happening, and that's a reality.
Yeah, and it's interesting to think about that because in that area, there's the bias against the farmers, but it's been a traditionally economically depressed area since logging and fishing have not been there. And so that, whether they want to realize it or not, the cannabis industry has been propping up that area for a very, very long time.
Yeah, and I'm also hoping that comes through in the film as well. Before, when the fishing industry, went away, the logging industry, then the cannabis industry came up there during the Back to the Landers movement, the late 60s, early 70s, and cannabis really carried those regions because, before legalization, there was probably 10,000 farms in each of the Emerald Triangle counties that were funneling the money back into their communities. And now it's people, as you know, have walked away from their farms. It's the same thing that happened in the dairy industry and other agricultural industries. So, it's just something that people don't really know about. But how can we change that? I don't know. But yeah, I hope the film inspires people to think about that more. I think cannabis is a unique industry. It's the backdrop of the film. It makes the film, I think very intriguing. But I think the larger message is that, capitalism that's happening in our country, the corporate capitalism that's just, these big box companies that are just wiping out all of these smaller businesses. I think we really need to look at that. And I think that ultimately it's potentially threatening our democracy and our country's livelihood. And, I just hope that people really kind of sit back and think about this a little bit.
Yeah.
And support their local businesses as much as possible.
That's it. I think that, the first step is what we're doing. We're talking about it. You're putting out, important media for people to look at and really understand that, it puts a human face to what's going on. And I think it's really interesting that cannabis has become in the forefront of our nation and the world at a time where we're going through incredible shift. I mean, at the risk of sounding woo-woo, CJ, we're changing the lens through which we look at the world when we look at, capitalism, colonialism, deconstructing methods or systems, I should say, and methods of oppression. And what we need to do, we had this. I used to say that cannabis provided us this unique opportunity to change the way we do business in the world, especially when we were more female dominated. That we could have,
totally,
we can be prosperous and help the world around us. And what were you going to say? I just interrupted you.
No, I'm completely with you. If there ever was an industry that could kind of change the paradigm, it would be the cannabis industry, because here we are, the symbol of counterculture mentality, of liberal thinking, of giving back to the environment, or protecting the environment, giving back to their communities. Cannabis is that symbol of thinking differently and the counterculture sort of, culture. So I feel like, we could do this differently with cannabis, especially across the country. This could be the industry that sort of shifts, the structure of setting up businesses and of really looking at capitalism a little bit differently, more compassionately. That's not the right word, but it's that's consciously.
Yeah.
Consciously. Yeah.
Because there is enough to go around. It's just, whether we even when we look at overtaxation in states, the one thing that I always want to say when we're in policy meetings is, hey, if you tax less, people will purchase more, and you end up in the end getting what you want and also being able to create sustainability for these companies. And I don't understand why, when you get to a certain level of policy, that all the common sense around basic economics gets thrown out the door.
Right. Exactly.
But
agreed.
I feel like, for people who are out there listening, it's watch this documentary, really understand what's going on. Part of what we're looking at here with policy, and policy that isn't serving, we're not serving small companies, we're not serving the people, because large corporations are not people. And we really need to educate ourselves about what's going on, because even if you're not interested in using cannabis, purchasing cannabis, working in cannabis, what the changes that we make in this industry with the way we look at business in the world will change the way we look at all businesses eventually. Just like the tech sector changed the way we do business and we look at the world, this will change hearts and minds too. And so better policy is driven by a better informed public, because remember, their jobs depend on our votes. And we need to get out there and say, I work, I pay taxes, I'm a more than functioning member of society, and a vote.
Amen. Amen.
And support female and queer cannabis and small businesses. And BIPOC cannabis. Everybody who's here that's, working hard with their hearts and souls, creating beautiful products and prosperity for their communities, we have to support.
Absolutely. That is the message of the film. Support your local businesses, your community, know where your cannabis is coming from.
Yeah.
And
I just want to thank you for putting all that work into it and connecting the world with all these wonderful women.
Well, it's been a pleasure and it's been a privilege to be able to tell these stories. So I appreciate all of the kind words and for giving me some time to talk about the film today. It's been really great to talk to you.
Absolutely. I hope I gave you enough time to talk, and I hope I didn't give away too much.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no, this was great. This was awesome. I just really encourage people to find the film, watch the film. We're currently streaming and in theaters right now.
And for people who want to follow you on social media or websites to be able to see the dates of the shows or reach out or just keep in touch, how would they do that?
Great question. So they can go to ladybudsmovie.com, and on the website we have a list of where our screenings are. We've been doing a robust festival tour in the last couple of months, and we're in the middle of a theatrical release currently. And we're also at the same time available on demand. You can watch the film on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, Microsoft, Vudu, Vimeo, and YouTube. And, please stay in touch on Instagram. We're at lady.buds, and we're on Facebook at ladybuds. And we have a wonderful community that's been supportive of the film and very interactive online. And we'd love to hear from you. We'd love for you to see the film and spread the word. It's an independent film that was, done very low budget, a lot of sweat equity, a lot of love from the community. So any support we can get from the community, please watch the film. We'd love to, and we'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you so much. The love totally shows. Everybody check out Ladybuds. And also remember, Planted is available on Amazon, Stitcher, Apple, Google, Spotify, Pandora, TuneIn, everywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts, and of course on our home network, Radio Misfits Network, out of Chicago. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter. It's Planted with Sara Payan on Facebook, and also our website is www.plantedwithsara.com. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. CJ, it's been wonderful having you on the podcast. Everybody, we're still in the midst of a pandemic, so it's a crazy world out there. Be kind to one another. Stay safe, and until next time, stay curious. Take care, everybody.